shadows, they were darker than the darkness of the basement at night in the winter in Connecticut. It was 1996, end of November. I remember the date because it was a week before my grandfather died in that house. After I leapt into my mother's arms, they were gone, and I have no idea what they were.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm your host, Sondra Sneed, source communicator, soul reader, and God scribe. And today our topic is ghosts. My guest host today is Samantha Dickinson, and she's just a brilliant mind. She is going to be presenting some questions. I don't know what they are yet. I just know that the topic is ghosts. So before we start that, Samantha, I wanted to show people a way of thinking about ghosts. And what you're going to see is a video taken from a guy who was playing around with his Kinect.
Hey you guys, I just wanted to show you guys a pretty quick feature of the Xbox One and its Kinect. It actually has a pretty cool night vision that I just found today. And if you guys already know it has night vision, then I'm going to show the people who don't know. So right now it's completely dark in this house right now. All you can basically see is my Xbox One controller. Now I'm going to switch on the night vision for you guys. As you can see, it lights up the whole room. It's actually a pretty cool feature. I don't know if they have an app for this or whatnot, but they also have this version of the camera. I don't know what it is. I think it's either infrared or something like that. And then back to dark. As you can see, all you can see is my Xbox controller. And then back to night vision. It's actually, pretty cool feature for the Xbox Kinect that I haven't really heard of until now. Maybe they have an app for it or something like that. But yeah, thanks for watching.
So let me back up and show you the image of his grandmother back in the background there. That's her ghost.
You see the forehead?
Yep, you see her forehead and her shoulder down over here. Forehead and her shoulder. And then at a certain point, she starts to dissipate and turns into this black mist. And this black mist is then starting to float up into the ceiling as parts of her shoulder remain. He's flipping through the different types of camera views. And when he gets back over to the night vision again, you'll notice she's gone. It's totally gone. She showed up right over here on the right-hand side, her shoulder and forehead. Let's go back to the ghost again, the apparition, full-bodied apparition, and watch it drift up, turning into a black mist. Her shoulder remains. Her face disappears. And you can see how the soul works like particles in water. That's how remnants of the soul can remain in a traumatic experience. It can leave behind portions of the soul, creating a residual effect. And in death, if someone's soul remains in a location where they spent a lot of time and they can't imagine themselves outside of where their life was, where they existed, their soul is going to remain trapped in this memory of their past.
What we're seeing, it's like the grandmother's soul never moved on from that sewing room. So the ghost of the grandmother is still there. Wow. So someone would need to cross over the grandmother, and he's probably not aware.
He's
Wow.
aware now. I was first told about it on the channel Nuke's Top 5. If you want to watch the best evidence of the existence of souls haunting locations, I think a great curator of those videos is called Nuke's Top 5. So with that, let's carry on with your questions, Samantha.
So I wanted to bring up an experience I had as a child that's sort of similar to what we just saw. So I was 4 years old. I was in the home I grew up in Connecticut. It was my grandparents' house, and my mother and I lived there. My mother's area of the house was the basement. So one night she was asleep in the bed down there. I was on the couch, and between us there was like a hallway kind of area, and then there's also like a living space area. So I wake up in the middle of the night, and I look over, and there are all these shadows on the floor in the living area, like their silhouettes, like their head and their torso, and it's like a sea of them, and it's like they're penetrating me. So I'm freaked out, And I yell to my mom, I'm like, Mommy, shadows. And she wakes up. She doesn't see them. And I'm looking and I see them. And she's like, how many are there? And I'm like, why is that like the first question you're asking me? I'm just like confused. And she's like, well, just come over here. So from the edge of the couch over to the bed, I leap for dear life. Because these shadows, they were darker than the darkness of the basement at night in the winter in Connecticut. It was 1996, end of November. I remember the date because it was a week before my grandfather died in that house. And yeah, after I leapt into my mother's arms, they were gone. And I have no idea what they were.
Wow. And did you ever see him again?
No, and I never saw them again.
How long did you live in that house? Or were you
Oh,
living
geez,
there? That
like
was
18 years. Yeah. Yeah, it was the only house I grew up in. Like, we never moved. I moved out when I went to college. So my entire, 18 years of my life.
Did you see any other ghosts or anything, any other paranormal experiences in that house?
When I was young, when I was that age, like, I didn't like sleeping in my room a lot. I don't remember seeing anything, but it was just like a sense I didn't want to be alone in my room. So if my mother was home, because sometimes she would work nights at the hospital, she was a nurse's aide in a neuro trauma unit. Like, if she wasn't working nights, I would like sleep on the couch, and it's like, okay, mommy's close by. I remember not wanting to sleep in my own room unless I had like a nightlight.
If this is your first time seeing my work, I allow the being that is God within me to speak through me. In soul readings, I allow the being that is God within you to speak through me. So when I say God says, that puts my mind in the God mind. It's a mnemonic device that just triggers open the God mind, allows my mind, that is my own personal personality, to move aside and to bifurcate into the greater mind. So God says, one way we would identify those souls that you saw is that they exist in the ground where you live. Ooh, very dark.
Very dark what?
What I'm feeling right now. They are souls that are part of that whole area that your house was in. There was a skirmish on native land where two frontiers met. What do you mean, like settlers or something? No, these are native wars, nations against nations. And that whole area is covered in the blood of the savagery in fighting for territory among the natives centuries before. It just so happens that the date you remember is significant. The date is a significant date, and it was an anniversary. You intuitively sensed the significance of that date, which is why you remember it. It was an anniversary of a dark event, one that will live in the ground forever. The death and the dying as a result of confrontation left the wailing of souls and the darkness of the night penetrate that ground where the house stood. And in the penetration of that ground, the blood lingers and leaves behind an imprint. The souls that were lost in that skirmish were not lost just through trauma. They were lost through surprise. It was the surprise attack that made it so intrensive for those souls, and why they are trapped by the night. You are one who could have, as that tiny little girl, helped them if you knew how. And it is something that this society has long lost the way to help the dead. It is in memories past, though. A soul remembers the time when it once knew how to move on souls that are entrenched in a land, how to clear a land of death. We would call this event similar to the story of when Cain killed Abel in the Bible. The reason that was such an important story to remain in human history is because it's about the bloodshed. Blood that is shed through murder is blood that stains a land, a location, until it is cleared through ethereal means. Because the stain is ethereal. It's not physical, or at least not physical in the way you understand physicality. It's particles of a remaining incident. So imagine you in a heightened state of fear for your life, knowing this is the end. Imagine a giant tornado coming your way, so big, you know you can't outrun it, you can't escape it, and you won't survive it. And imagine it coming toward you in such a way that it says you're going to die today. So you see your death ahead of you. And all of the range of chemical response in your body that rushes through every ventricle and vein. Then when that blood is shed, it's alive and it's dying. And in its living death, it stains the ethereal structures, the fibers of a moment in time, leaving an impression that never leaves until it has one thing: remembering. To remember what happened and why. Because that is the biggest question on every soul's mind when it is killed and left to bleed to death, to die, is why. So it dies with the question why, but no answer. If you can bring to those souls some resolve to their why they died, why they lived, what purpose that soul had or served in some tiny little way, it will break the spell of its cast into hell. People think hell in such a warped way. They think of hell as a condemnation for being bad, doing dumb things, wrong habits. But hell is a state of mind for the soul that traps it in a place it can be consumed by a darker evil. And it's not consumed once and gone, it's a continuous consumption of that evil, that darkness, an inescapable condition. The only way to escape it is to smack it out of its place, give it a new view of itself, and turn it to its origin. There's so much more we could say about that.
Yeah, I was getting chills as you were talking. I just let you keep going. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. I feel like this could be an entire book. I mean, and in some ways it kind of is. The book God Wrote Through Me, What to Do When You're Dead, was really centered on this, that God is very concerned with our souls, a lot less concerned with our day-to-day concerns and worries, although God wants to allay our worries day to day, but for fear of what happens to the soul should one day, out of the blue, we're hit by a car or struck with an illness and die prematurely. Are we ready? Are we ready for death?
It's wild.
Yeah, man. Okay, well, talk about that, the other experience you had.
This experience, it was while my mother was pregnant with me in the same house. She was in the upstairs area, what would become my bedroom, and then my grandparents were in the room beside that, and then there's a hallway that led to the kitchen living room. So my mother and grandparents, they were, in their separate rooms up there one night, and in the kitchen, they just heard like shattering glass, as if like people were like fighting and like throwing glass, and it went on for like a minute, like a very long time, just like shattering glass, like people fighting. And when it was done, they, met up with each other and they were like, "Did you hear that?" And they went out to the kitchen and nothing was out of place. Nothing. They went back, came back, and they saw like a picture that was hanging over the sink. Was in the sink, but no one had heard it fall. Like, so it was a very sort of like curious situation on the same property.
So that does, like God said, that story will give context to what God is about to tell. And that's the skirmish or the conflict you're hearing. God says it's radio frequency audio in a band when frequency or airwaves, frequencies moving through the air, make a certain shape in the air. It can bend residual sounds. So will bend so it becomes part of the audible spectrum, in other words. So it becomes visible based on how radio waves can interact or interfere with each other and then create an audio opening. It's not a frequency like a radio station. It's a frequency in an audio band. So the human ear has an audible band or a wave signature in a band.
So there's like a range of what we can hear.
In a sense, that's where we're going. But there's also a band that exists in the range exists in a band. So each of these bands, some are audible, some are subsonic, but in the band of audible sound, so imagine all these bands layered like a layered cake. When radio frequencies are flying through the air, say there's a radio on in the other room or even in a car in the driveway or at the neighbor's house, and those radio waves are drifting through the air, it can cause a certain bend to occur in that band of what's audible, so that what would be normally inaudible suddenly becomes audible. And when you're talking about a conflict such as what we described, where people are fighting for their life, and the conflict is such a huge residual stain, merely bending sound can create an echo of that resonance in back to an audible range. In other words, it was a residual conflict reaching audible. That's why you didn't see the breaking glass. Imagine sitting in your house all comfortable, snuggling up to a good book, not worrying about anything at all. And suddenly, out of the blue, out of nowhere, someone's crashing through your front window with a machete.
That's intense. Are you getting like a time period on that?
I'm getting flashes of images that are pre-settlements, like not. I mean, there would have been some colonists,
Like Native American. There's a reservation, like a mile or two away. It was called, I forget what it was, like Bear Reservation or something. So the land did have that kind of history. I lived on the border of Connecticut and like New York. So I don't know if like this is happening before, any sort of like state or territorial lines were drawn in terms of New York, Connecticut.
Yeah, those two what I'm seeing, that I'm not sure that those were even established at New York native tribes.
Yeah, this was in Danbury, Connecticut, on the border of Danbury and New Fairfield.
Danbury, Connecticut. Let me look it up. Many native tribes have historically lived in the areas of Danbury, Connecticut, and New York, including Shagatook, Potatook, and Paquo. Native tribes That would be interesting to look at. It's definitely in the early to mid 1700s. I don't know that, you can look at some clothes and Western clothes and kind of get a sense for the time period, but I can't be
Mhm.
looking at
That's what
maybe.
I was thinking. I felt like 1700 kind of era when you were speaking. And then also when you were speaking, I was remembering as a child, like when it would get close to like winter, I would start having like nightmares a lot, nightmares about like running through the land, trying to escape, like these paranoia, like kind of nightmares. So I always hated like the turn from fall into winter because I felt like, I would get this kind of, I thought it was more like seasonal depression, but this sort of like different vibe.
What was the date that you said that
It was a week before December 3rd, 1996. So it would have been late
November?
November, late November.
That would be worth looking up. um, I don't even know if it's documented in history the way it looks in my mind's eye. I have no idea who would hold that kind of history of a native skirmishes between
Hmm.
tribes. Um, that surely there would be some kind of tribal history.
I know Danbury, Connecticut. Like our high school mascot was the Mad Hatter because it was a hat manufacturing town, and a lot of the mercury seeped into the ground, and people were going crazy because of that. So that's like the
Wow.
overarching historical narrative of Danbury, Connecticut,
Oh, that's what
and
makes
where
a
that
Mad
happened.
Hatter. Is
Yeah, it's the mercury.
I'll be doggone. Um, okay, so as not to get too far, do you have anything else on your list of questions?
Yeah, in regards to the land, so when I was in high school in this neighborhood, I was driving home from school and a tree fell on my car and totaled the car. And I sort of walked away from the accident without any sort of like scratch on me. It was this freak accident on a windy day. And the tree just hit the car while I was passing under it. So I'm wondering if that's related to this sort of like land or neighborhood history, or is that something else?
Um, Seeing a torrent of wind picking the damn thing up, and I mean, that tree just kind of got uprooted and dropped. Now, the question is the timing. God says you could have been under it. You could have easily been under it, but that was stopped and you were protected from it. You could easily have died from that had you not been protected from it. You weren't targeted by any means. It would have been just wrong place,
Mhm.
wrong time.
Yeah.
But you would definitely have died had not there not been an intervention.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah, yeah, it was like a freak accident.
Right. Wrong place, wrong time.
Hmm.
That whole area is uh, working against your mind and your history. Meaning,
Hmm.
this is kind of hard to explain, but we'll do our best. Your history as a soul has experienced traumatic events throughout the history of the evolution of your soul. And these traumatic events have all been circumstantial. But what brought you to the circumstance is what's interesting. It's kind of like those individuals who can be struck by lightning 3 and 4 times when nobody else is ever struck by lightning, yet there are some people who are struck multiple times. It is a draw of energy to that soul that makes them a rod or a lightning rod to activity. Activity, in the way we mean it, is electromagnetically charged. So a soul can impact an electromagnetic charge wherever it travels if it has the right magnetic resonance. And that magnetic resonance may not be anything you are particularly connected to. You don't know that you've been walking across the carpet and your fingertips are charged until you touch something, right? You're just walking, not thinking about the charge you're building up on the carpet you're walking on. So until your finger feels that discharge, that you recognize an event or an activity has occurred by your actions. So that's essentially how your soul has gone through time, building up an electromagnetic charge, and you're totally unaware of it until some evidence shows up right in front of you that you have affected or something is affecting you. You have made an effect or something has affected you. So you could, if you just relaxed your mind, sat down with a pen, you could write time after time after time after time after time that you've been in the middle of an activity, totally uninitiated or provoked, but yet you become an audience for some chaos or kinetic disorder, dysfunction. So this is why your evolution has to manage a quicker step into joy, why joy has to be such an important component of your pursuit. It doesn't mean that you have to do some grandiose thing, and this is true for everyone. Joy doesn't come from some grandiose fulfillment. Joy doesn't have to come from you standing up on a stage and a million people clapping their hands at your performance. What joy comes from is these tiny individual moments that are generated by satisfying a need, an urge, and a want in a tiny way. Some of our examples seem mundane, but they work. They are exactly where joy comes from. For example, if you're freezing, you've been cold all day, you just haven't gotten warm. Maybe you've been in a refrigerated, air-conditioned building, office building all day long, and you just haven't gotten warm. You go home, you get in a hot tub, and suddenly every inch of your body in that hot tub has changed from frigid discomfort to warm, relax, absolute comfort, not a care in the world, in that singular moment of complete surrender to your environment. That's joy. And it can come in the simplest, littlest ways. A tiny piece of dark chocolate when you've been digging and digging and digging, looking all over the house, tearing it apart for something sweet. And you find this little piece of dark chocolate at the bottom of the freezer that you had forgotten about, a candy bar you had put down there months ago. But that tiny little bit of satisfaction was enough to bring joy. It ended the search. And these tiny little places of joy that you have to find, and really everyone needs it, but some more than others. Your soul needs a kinetic response that returns back to you some sense of joy. Otherwise, that kinetic response is just ungrounded, creating static, waiting for the next electromagnetic storm to discharge all of that energy into it. So you get a falling tree when you're driving, or you get a mishap in your work or in a relationship or in a conversation, all because the electromagnetic charge hasn't had a good grounding in joy. Does that kind of answer your question in a roundabout way?
Yeah, that's fascinating how you were saying my soul finds itself in the middle of these sort of like storms, and it's like the way to ground or step out of that is find these moments of joy through hobbies like running. Like I will play harp. That's been something I've been trying to like figure out, do these hobbies and find what brings me joy. And I think everyone needs that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I'm glad you're so pursuant in it, though, because even though everybody needs it, not everybody is pursuant.
I see the value of it. I don't know if it's because like I find myself in these situations, but yeah, if we were doing these hobbies, it's a way of like grounding, like very seriously for me.
So to finish out the ghost topic conversation and the soul, the nature of the soul and how it can get trapped in its own electromagnetic storm if it's not grounded by joy, and suddenly death is brought upon the soul, then the idea of what you are that exists in this world pertains to the soul, not in an outward way, in what you are that is a success, the way your human world has identified success, but what you are that is the fulfillment of a self that is identified by the soul. This is what matters to the soul after death, finding a sense of purpose for life. Not finding purpose as in this is the reason I exist, but finding purpose in a day. This is why I got up this morning. And if the only reason you can find for why you got up this morning is that so you can pay your bills, your soul will not experience what it is that fulfills a life. You get up in the morning in order that you become the best at what you do, at what you are doing. Even if what you are doing does not demonstrate the best of what you are, if you put the best of what you are in what you are doing, you will be better than anyone else at what you do. And you can grow from there to being more of you and not stuck in the ways of you that feel stuck. The soul that you are is always encouraging itself through its confidence in what it can do. Challenge your soul. Every time you challenge yourself to learn something new, you bring joy to the soul. Every time you learn something new and are better than what you were doing before, you bring joy to the soul. Every time you bring joy to the soul, you bring a better you to today. So why did you get up this morning? To find a better you today, which will be as good as you can be today. And every time you build up on that, every tomorrow is better than you were yesterday. There's so much more to talk about, and we will. But for now, let's say goodnight. Sleep tight and wake up in the morning bringing joy to your soul.